After looking into data dictionaries and identify primary and foreign keys, now we're ready to start the merging process. So let's take a look at the setting we're dealing with here. The company we're looking at is a hypothetical company, which is called Plenty Company, and it is a fictional brewery that has recently gone through big changes. The company sells 6 different products. The brewery has only recently expanded its business to distributing from 1 state to 9 states, and now its business has begun stabilizing after the expansion. With that stability comes a need for better analysis. One of the company's first priorities is to identify its areas of success as well as areas of potential improvement. So the software that we need for this merging exercise is Excel and some screen capture tool. We'll also be needing a Excel spreadsheet dataset, which is called merging_example, which is uploaded in this week's folder. Please make sure you download the dataset before watching the next part of the video lecture. So if you look at this dataset, it contains 3 tables or 3 sheets. The product table, the sales table, and the customer table. I have put the screenshots of each of the 3 tables in here. So the product table is quite simple and it introduces you to the 6 type of products that the brewery sells, which are Pale Ale, Imperial, IPA, Imperial Stout, Stout, and Wheat. You also have the sale price of each of the 6 products. So it is a relatively simple table. The sales table is longer and more complicated. So each row represents a unique sales order, and then you got the information for that sales order, including the date the sales order was created, the ID of the employee that made the sale, the customer ID, the product code, the sales order quantity, and the sales price. Finally, you also have the customer dataset, which stores all the key information about each unique customer. So after observing the 3 tables, here is our conclusion. The product table has a primary key of product code. So each product is uniquely identified by its product code. We've also got the sales table, which is the main table, and its primary key is sales order ID, which is the first column in there. We also have 2 foreign keys that are inserted into the sales table, which are product code and customer ID. Finally, for the customer table, the primary key would be customer ID. Also, to link the sales table with the product table, we will be using the product code as the common merging variable. And for the sales table and the customer table, we can link them together with the use of customer ID as the common merging variable. So that is going to be our logic for merging the 3 tables together. With the goal of merging all 3 tables together, we are going to look at 3 approaches, which are using the Excel formula VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP as the first option. Approach 2 would use the Excel Power Query Editor, and approach 3, which is optional, will use Excel Internal Data Model. I would strongly recommend you to try out approach 1 and approach 2 first before exploring approach 3. So now let's take a look at the first approach of merging datasets, which would require the use of 2 formulas in Excel, which are VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP. We'll first take a look at VLOOKUP, and then we'll move on to talk about XLOOKUP. VLOOKUP is an Excel formula that is usually used to find things in a table or arrange by row, which means vertically. That is why it's called VLOOKUP. The V here means vertical. The syntax for the VLOOKUP formula is usually as follows. So it's equal to VLOOKUP, and then you put 4 parameters in the parentheses. The first parameter is called lookup value. This means the value that you're trying to look for. And then you have table array as the second input variable. This means where you want to look for it. Then you have the column index number as the third input variable, and this indicates the column number in the range containing the value to return. Finally, there is a range lookup option where you can either put in approximate or exact match by using true or false. We use exact match in this class, so we'll type in false as the last parameter. Now here is a special note for the second input variable, table array. Table array is the table that contains the corresponding primary key or that contains the lookup value that you're trying to search for. VLOOKUP automatically would search the first column for the primary key, so you always want to make sure that the primary key is situated in the first column of that table selection. So after looking at the syntax of VLOOKUP, let's try a couple of examples to see how we can apply the VLOOKUP formula. So the simple use of VLOOKUP is just to look up things in a table or a range of cells. For example, if you want to look for the quantity of a sales order in the sales table, this is what you can do. So let's now go to Excel to see how we can implement the VLOOKUP formula. So you can see here that we have the three individual tables here. We've got the product table, we've got the sales table, and then we have the customer table. We're going to go to the sales table now because this is the primary table that we want to focus on. So the example we're trying to do is we want to look up for the sales quantity for a specific order that is defined by its order ID. What we can do is we can create a little search area over here where I'm going to perform some searches. For example, in I6, I'm going to put in sales order ID. And in cell J6, I'm going to put in the quantity. And in cell I7, I'm going to put in a sales order ID. Let's make it 20003, for example. And in J7, what I want the cell to return is the quantity that's sold in the sales order 20003. So how can we make VLOOKUP do that for us? So that would be equal to VLOOKUP. And then it's going to ask you for the lookup value. So what value are you trying to look up? We're trying to look up for the order 20003. So that would be the value that I put in I7. And then you want to put in the table array, which is the big area where you want to do the search, which in our case will be all of the content in the sales table, which is from A1 all the way to G133. Now to select that range, what you can do is put your cursor at A1 first, and then hit Control and Shift at the same time, and then hit the right pointing arrow, and then hit the downward pointing arrow. Then it's going to select everything for us, okay? And you can go up to this formula bar to edit your formula. Put a comma here, and then we go to our column index number. The column index number essentially is Excel's way of asking you which column of data do you want me to return. So we said that we wanted to look for the quantity of a sales order. So we got to figure out the column index number for the quantity column, which is, as you can see, in column here, column number F, which is column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to put in number 6 in here to indicate that I want the quantity column to be returned. And it's asking you, do you want approximate or exact match? We're going to select exact match, which would be false here. And then we'll close the parenthesis and hit enter at this time. And it's going to return the quantity of order ID 20003, which is 8. which is the correct one that we're looking for here. So this is order 20003, and this is the quantity of that order. You can also do another sales order ID, which let's put it in as 20012. Okay. Then it's going to update it and the quantity becomes 1, which is this order, and that is again the correct one. So with this, you can very easily look up for the quantity of different sales orders, the product code of different sales orders, etc. For example, let's say we're looking into the product code, which is in column E here of a particular sales order, okay? Then we can put product code in cell K6 here. And in cell K7, I am going to put in the VLOOKUP formula as equal to VLOOKUP. And then again, we're looking for this particular sales order. So the lookup value would be the cell I7. The table array will again be the entire content of table sales, which would be from A1 all the way to G133, which we can select by putting our cursor to cell A1, and then again hit Control and Shift, hit the right pointing arrow and the downward pointing arrow, and that takes you to the entire content of sales table. Then you got to put in the column index number again. So since this time we're looking for the product code, which product code is in column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, number 5 here. So that's why we put in 5 here as the column index number, which is the third input variable. And finally, we want the exact match, which will be false here. And then close the parentheses, hit enter. Then you got the product code for order 20012, which is here, and that would be 2005, which is correct. So you can also, let's say, change this to order 20017 and see if it's still going to give you the right quantity and product code. And you can see the quantity is 1, which is correct, and the product code is 2001, which is also correct. That is the simple use of VLOOKUP in Excel. Now that we understand the simple use of VLOOKUP as a lookup tool, as its name suggests, we're going to take advantage of its functionality and use it as a merging tool. So the logic for using VLOOKUP for merging datasets is actually similar to the previous examples of using that as a lookup tool. So the goal here is, suppose we would like to know the product description, which is in the product table for each of the sales orders in the sales table. Remember that to link the product table to the sales table, we can use the common merging variable or the foreign key, which is product code. So now let's go to Excel and try to implement it in Excel with the VLOOKUP function. So I'll be removing this area here because I am now in the merging process. So I want to remove anything that's redundant or may cause confusion. So I'll select this area and right click and click on Clear Contents. Okay. All right. So the goal, as I've talked about before, is to look for the product description, which is in here, for each of the sales orders in the sales table. Because as you can see in the sales table, we have only the sales order and all these other information, but we don't have the product description. We have, though, the product code only, but not the specific description. So suppose our goal is to also have the product description column in the sales table as well. So we can do that by performing a merging process, and we can use VLOOKUP to help us do that. Okay, so now I'm going to put in column H the new variable description, which is called product description. And we're going to focus on this row only because the rest of the rows we can just copy and paste the formula. So we'll be focusing on this particular sales order ID, which is 20001. All right, so to think about how we can bring over the product description for this particular order, the process would be to look for the product code of this order, which is 2001, and we look for 2001 in the product table over here. And here we go, we found it. And we also know the product description is pale ale. We want to bring this pale ale cell to the sales order in the product description column. So that is the logic of the merging process. And now let's try to implement it with the VLOOKUP function. So in cell H2, I'm going to put in equal to VLOOKUP. And then is the lookup value. So the lookup value is that common merging variable that we would look for, and that would be the product code, right? We look for the product code of this particular sales order in which table. So that is table array. The table array in this case would be the product table, which is from A1 all the way to C7 of the product table. So we look for the product code from the product table, and we want to return which column. We want to return the product description column, which is in column 2. So we put in column 2 here, and then we put in false as we want exact match. And we can close the parentheses and hit enter now. So one thing that I want to point out is once you select the product table, you're going to stay in the product table and continue with your formula. You don't want to jump back to the sales table and write the formula there. That will disturb the flow of the formula. So make sure that once you are in the product table, just stay here. And once you're done with the formula, you hit enter, it will take you back to the sales table automatically. So now let's hit enter and see what happens. Okay, so you can see that it has brought over pale ale, which is the product description for the first sales order, to my sales table in the column H, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so far it looks like we have succeeded in that mission. Let's see if we're able to apply the same formula for the rest of the sales orders on the sales table. So what we usually do is we're going to put our cursor around the right bottom corner of the first row, and we double click, okay? And usually that will auto-populate for us for the rest of the rows. In this case, you can see some of the rows are working well, but some of the other rows over here are not working. So we need to investigate why that is the case. If we put our cursor in cell H3 and investigate the formula, you can see that it's looking up value E3, which is the product code for this particular order, which is correct. But it's looking for that E3 value in a different area in the product table. In particular, it's looking for it in the product table from A2 to C8. Which is from here to C8, right? So it's missing some of the table area in here, which is incorrect, right? If you look at the cell in H4, now it has shifted to product table from A3 to C9, which is over here, A3 to C9. Which is really missing a lot of the areas that we actually want to look for. So what is happening in this case is as we shift down to the other rows, these area that's indicated in the formula also is shifting down. So that means the area that we have selected in the product table is not constant, is not fixed. It keeps changing. And that's not what we want. So What we want is to fix the reference of the product table to always be from A1 to C7 of the product table. So how can we anchor that cell reference? We can do that by two ways. First, we can just put in dollar signs manually in front of the column and cell numbers. So in A1 here, I'm putting the dollar sign in front of A and in front of 1. For the C7 here, I'm also putting in manually the dollar sign here. Okay, so with that, you're fixing your reference of the product table to always be in A1 and C7. It would no longer shift as you go to different rows here. Another option that allows you to fix the cell reference is instead of inserting the dollar sign in front of the row and column indicators manually, you could use the function key F4. So let me remove these dollar signs and show you how you can do this. So you are going to highlight this whole area containing the cells that you want to fix, and you're going to click on F4. That way it will create the dollar signs for you automatically. Now, in some cases, you might want to hit your Fn, the function key, and F4 together in order to invoke that function. But basically, F4 is the shortcut you need to use for fixing the self-reference. Now with that fixed, we can hit enter and do the auto calculation again. And you can see for all the sales orders, the production description is successfully brought over. And if you check the underlying formula, you will see that the product area from A1 to C7 applies to each of the sales orders over here. In other words, it does not shift down. It is now anchored or fixed. Okay, now we're going to do another example of merging sales table with another table. And just now we merged the sales table with the product table. Now we're going to try to merge the sales table with the customer table. Especially, we want to bring the business name of the customer from the customer table over to the sales table. So in cell I1, I'm going to put in business name because this is the new column that I will bring over. And I'm going to set up my VLOOKUP, so it's going to execute that for me. It's going to be equal to VLOOKUP. And remember, the common merging variable to link the sales and the customer tables together is the customer ID. So to look for the customer name for the first order over here in row 2, we have to look for the customer ID of this order in the customer table over here, which is all the way from A1 to F63, and put a comma here. And since we need to bring the business name over, that is column number 2. So we put in column index number as number 2. Before you put in the column index number, you want to put a comma between the customer table and the column index number. And we put in another comma after the column index number, and we put in false, which indicates exact match, and close the parentheses. And remember that we want to fix the reference over here. So we're going to highlight this and hit that F4 button. So it's going to fix the reference for us and then hit enter. Then it's going to take us back to the sales table, and you can see the name of the customer for this first sales order, which would be general distributors. Okay, now we can let it auto-populate for us by double-clicking, and there you go. We've got all the business name of the customers for each sales order in sales table column I now. So we have successfully merged one column in the customer table to the sales table based on customer ID as the common merging variable. And the formula is right here. So now I would like to ask you guys to pause here and perform a similar VLOOKUP on your own. So suppose you would like to merge the customer table with the sales table again, but this time you want to bring the customer city, which is in column D of the customer table, to the sales table and put it in column J over here. Take a couple minutes, go over our video lecture, and see if you're able to perform that independently and successfully. After going over 2 examples of using VLOOKUPs in a simple case and 2 examples of using it for merging and performing your own VLOOKUP search, now let's do a summary of the VLOOKUP function. So with VLOOKUP, we can bring data from a related table to the primary table only one column at a time. We cannot bring multiple columns over using one VLOOKUP formula. The second point is we always need to make sure that the lookup value, which is that foreign key that we need to look for in the related table, is located in the first column of the table array, which means the column that you want to return must be to the right of the column you're looking up. If the return column is on the left of the lookup column, then VLOOKUP doesn't know how to perform the search. So in all of the 3 tables that we did before, we have the primary key listed as the first column. So if you're using VLOOKUP, you always want to make sure that that is the case. The third point is there is an improved version of VLOOKUP, which is called the XLOOKUP, that is now available on newer versions of Excel. So any Excel 2019 or newer would have XLOOKUP available. With XLOOKUP, you can look in one column for a search term and return a result from the same row in another column, regardless of which side the column is in. So you don't have to always make sure that the lookup value is in the first column of the table array. So this is different from the VLOOKUP. Also, you're able to return multiple columns at a time with the help of XLOOKUP. So it seems like XLOOKUP is the enhanced version of VLOOKUP, and it's definitely worth a try. So now let's go to talk about how to use XLOOKUP in the merging process. XLOOKUP is typically used to find things in a table or arrange by row, which means vertically, and by column, which means horizontally. It offers more flexibility and stronger functionality than VLOOKUP. So the syntax for XLOOKUP is equal to XLOOKUP and then parentheses. Then we put in 6 parameters. The first 3 are required, the last 3 are optional. So the first input variable or the parameter is the lookup value, the same as VLOOKUP. The second input value is the lookup array. This is where you would select the array to search for that lookup value. And the third parameter is the return array. So this is where you select the array or the range to return. And then you have the if not found, which you put in the value when you are not able to find a match. And then you're also able to specify the match code and the search code. If you compare the formula for XLOOKUP and VLOOKUP, you can see that XLOOKUP uses a lookup array and a return array separately as the second and third parameter, whereas VLOOKUP uses a single table array and a column index number as the second and the third parameter. So with a separate lookup array and return array in XLOOKUP, it offers more flexibility. When using the XLOOKUP function, you have to put in the lookup value, the lookup array, and the return array, but you don't necessarily have to put in the last 3 parameters, which are value if not found, match mode, and search mode. Value if not found is the value to put in if a valid match is not found. So you could put in that as not available or match not found. But by default, it's going to return pound n dash a. The match mode is also optional, and where you can specify whether you want exact match or you want to return the next smaller item or the next larger item. By default, it's going to use exact match, which is what we want in this chapter. Finally, the last parameter is the search mode. You could do a search starting at the first item. This is the default option, or you can perform a reverse search starting at the last item or a few other options. So we are not going to use the last three parameters because the default option is good enough. We'll primarily focus on identifying and specifying the first three parameters correctly when using our XLOOKUP. All right, now we're going to use XLOOKUP instead of VLOOKUP to achieve the same merging goal as before. Remember, when we're using VLOOKUP, we wanted to first know the product description, which is in the product table for each sales order. Now we're going to use XLOOKUP to do that. All right, so now let's go to our Excel spreadsheet and see how we can write the XLOOKUP formula. So I'm going to put in column J, product description again. And then I'm going to put in XLOOKUP just to denote the fact that this one we're going to be using the XLOOKUP as the formula. So I'm going to put in equal to XLOOKUP. And again, to put the sales and the product table together, we use the product code as the lookup value, similar as when we use VLOOKUP. So we're still looking up the value of the product code here. And we're looking for it in the product table. In particular, we're looking for it in A1 to A7 of the product table, because A1 to A7 is the column that contains the product code. Okay, so I selected product A1 to A7, highlighted and fixed the reference. So we're always selecting from that same column. And comma here. And then we need to put in the return array, which is the column that we want to return, which would be column B in the product table. So I'm going to select B1 to B7 here and hit comma and then highlight it and then fix the reference. So there you go. You've put in the lookup code, which is the product code for row 2. And you've put in the lookup array, which is the column in the product table that contains the product code, which is from A1 to A7. You've also put in the return array, which is the column that contains the product description, which would be column B from B1 to B7. And that's it. That is everything you need to put in. And then we can close the parentheses and hit enter. And there you go. It's going to do that for us automatically. So it's showing you the product description similar as the one using VLOOKUP. So we can also let it auto-populate for us by double-clicking. This time, since we fixed the reference, there is no issues. Everything is populated for us automatically. Okay, so that is how we can use XLOOKUP to perform the merge. Similarly, if we want to find the business name for the customer, we can do in column K, put in business name, and then XLOOKUP. Then in here, I'm going to put in equal to XLOOKUP. And we're going to look up the customer ID. And we're going to look for the customer ID in the customer table in column A from A1 to A7. 63. Again, want to fix the reference here. And then put in the comma. And then the return array is going to be the business name of the customer in the customer table, which is column B of the customer table from B1 to B63. And again, fix the reference by pressing F4. And there you go. That's everything that you need to specify. You can close parentheses, hit enter, and then it gives us general distributor as the name of our customer for the first sales order. Again, we can let it auto-populate for us by double-clicking. So you can see with XLOOKUP, you can achieve the same thing as VLOOKUP. But the advantage of the XLOOKUP function is you're able to select the lookup array and the return array separately, so it gives you more flexibility. Now I would like you guys to pause here and see if you're able to do a XLOOKUP search on your own. Please try using XLOOKUP to bring the customer's zip code, which is in column F of the customer table, to the sales table, and we want to put that in column L of the sales table. So take a couple minutes and see if you're able to do that. All right, I hope everybody was able to perform that XLOOKUP merge. It's very similar to the two examples we already gave in the video lecture on XLOOKUP. Next, I want to talk about some functionality that is only available in XLOOKUP and not available in VLOOKUP. So unlike VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP can return multiple columns with a single formula. We can simply do that by selecting multiple columns as the return array as opposed to selecting a single column. Now we'll go back to our Excel file and see how that can be done. Now I'm going to put my cursor in column L here, and what I want to do here is I want to use one single formula of XLOOKUP to bring all of the customer table into the sales table. So that would be business name, customer address, customer city, customer state, and customer zip code. So I'm going to copy all of these variable names. And I'm going to paste it in column L of the sales table. And then I'm going to put in my XLOOKUP formula, which is equal to XLOOKUP. And again, to link the sales table with the customer table, we use the customer ID as the common merging variable, which is in D2 here, comma. And to look for this customer ID, we need to go to the customer table and look for it in column A of the customer table. So customer table A1 to A63, fix the reference. We always want to make sure that we fix the reference here because we don't want it to switch to a different search area. And putting comma here. And the return array, since we want to return everything in the customer table, we're going to select column B and hit Control and Shift and the right pointing arrow and the downward pointing arrow. So this way we have selected the B1 to F63 of the customer table. And we fix the reference again. So this way we have selected column B all the way to column F as the return array as opposed to just one single column as the return array. And we can close the parentheses and hit enter. And there you go. You can see all of the columns are brought over, not just the one column. All the columns from B to F are now in sales table. And again, we can let it calculate it for us automatically by double clicking it or dragging it all the way down. so that we are now able to merge everything in the customer table to the sales table with just one Excel formula using XLOOKUP. This was not available in VLOOKUP. So this is one example of how XLOOKUP provides more functionality than VLOOKUP by returning multiple columns with a single formula. Another feature in XLOOKUP is with VLOOKUP, we always need to make sure that the return column is to the right of the lookup column. Otherwise, VLOOKUP would not work. With XLOOKUP, you can look in one column and return another column regardless of the positions of the two columns. For example, the lookup column could be to the left or could be to the right of the return column. It doesn't matter because in the XLOOKUP selection, we can separately select the lookup column and the return column. So there is no positional requirement for these two columns. Also, XLOOKUP allows searches to be performed both vertically and horizontally. So it replaces not only VLOOKUP, which is vertical lookup, but also HLOOKUP, which is horizontal lookup. For example, in this exercise, the search can be performed both vertically by looking for the different items in the income statement. It could also be done horizontally by looking at the different quarters. So this also means you can use a nested XLOOKUP to perform two-way lookup. So you can look for the gross profit, for example, in quarter 1 or the interest in quarter 3. So you can do a two-way lookup. At the bottom of this page is a link to a very good video that talks about XLOOKUP. This lecture benefited significantly from this tutorial, so if you have some extra time, please take a look at the XLOOKUP tutorial.